As we read the Quran and the life of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, it's very easy for me and you to overlook the battles that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ took part in. It's very easy for me and you to take them for granted and to think, so what? These battles don't even relate to me. But the reality is those very battles that we're taking for granted not only relate to us in a countless number of ways, but those very ways that we're taking for granted are typically the most life-changing, the most impactful, the most transformative ways there is. This video is going to share a couple with you that are just going to blow your mind, inshallah ta'ala. But first, let me give you some context. When the Muslims finally gained power in Medina, after 13 years of torture and persecution from the Quraysh, where they literally stole them of their dignity, their honor, even their provisions they were stripped away from them, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala finally gave permission for the Muslims to fight back. These 13 years they had no permission to fight back. They were turning the other cheek. But after 13 years of severe persecution, they finally were allowed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to fight back. And so the Prophet ﷺ would begin by sending expeditions to basically loot the disbelievers and to increase the strength of the Muslims. And one time the Prophet ﷺ knew of a very big caravan filled with a lot of goods that was led by Abu Sufyan, one of the leaders of Mecca at the time, the leaders of Quraysh, that was passing near Medina. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he gathered around 300 men to launch an expedition to loot that caravan. As they were on their way, Abu Sufyan, he found out because of his spies. And so straight away, there and then, he sent a man named Damdam to get back up from Mecca as soon as possible to protect his caravans from being looted by the Muslims. And so Damdam hurried all the way back to Mecca, and just before he entered Mecca, he mutilated his own camel, and he smeared the blood all over his body like this, and he started screaming to the people inside of Mecca, the Muslims are about to attack, the Muslims are about to attack. The enemies of Islam were so riled up that they prepared a full-fledged army of 1,000 people consisting of their greatest armor, their greatest weapons, and even their senior leaders, and they all started marching out towards the Muslims outside of Mecca. But the Muslims, on the other hand, they only went out for an expedition. They had no idea that an army was on their way to fight them. They went out thinking that we're just going to loot a caravan. And so they were limited in their armor, they were limited in their weaponry, they were limited in their animals. They literally just went out to loot a caravan. Only in the very last moment did the Muslims confirm that there was an army on their way, and they didn't have time to go back to Medina to prepare themselves properly. They didn't have time to get armor, they didn't have time to get weapons. It was just 300 half-prepared Muslims that didn't even know they were going to take place in the battle versus 1,000 fully geared up disbelievers with weaponry, with animals, with everything they need, ready to fight a battle. Put yourself in their shoes. How would you feel? Imagine you were in the shoes of one of those 300 people. You would be terrified. You would be shook. But of course, we're talking about the Sahaba, right? And so their hearts were filled with tawakkul. They knew with certainty that is exactly what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed. Their hearts were filled with Iman and taqwa in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so when they faced the enemy, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent down the angels to support the Muslims, and the battle was a decisive win. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says in the Quran, وَلَقَدْ نَصَرَكُمُ اللَّهُ بِبَدْرٍ وَأَنْتُمْ أَذِلَّةٌ فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَشْكُرُونَ. Indeed, Allah made you victorious at this battle, known as the Battle of Badr, where you were vastly outnumbered, 300 versus 1,000. So be mindful of Allah, perhaps you will be grateful. Hold that thought. Now, what's interesting, okay, and now we're going to take this to the next level, is that most of the battles that the Muslims took part in, they were also outnumbered. In the Battle of Badr, 300 versus 1,000. In the Battle of Uhud, the Muslims were 700, the enemy were 3,000. In the Battle of Ahzab, the Muslims were 3,000 and the enemies were 10,000. In the Battle of Mu'tah, the Muslims were 3,000 and the enemy was 100,000. The one time, and this is where you need to pay attention, the one time that the Muslims outnumbered the disbelievers was during the Battle of Hunain. This is one of the last battles that the Prophet ﷺ took part in. In that battle, when the Muslims were preparing, they looked around and they thought, how could we lose? We have such a big army. We're fully prepared. We have weaponry. We have everything that we need. How could we lose? And subhanAllah, when the battle took place and it started, it was a decisive loss at the very beginning, and the Muslims took a huge blow. Only until when they fixed the state of their hearts did Allah eventually give them victory. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, and now you have the context, لَقَدْ نَصَرَكُمُ اللَّهُ فِي مَوَاطِنَ كَثِيرًا وَيَوْمَ حُنَيْنٍ إِذْ أَعْجَبَتْكُمْ كَثْرَتُكُمْ فَلَمْ تُغْنِ عَنْكُمْ شَيْئًا وَضَاقَتْ عَلَيْكُمُ الْأَرْضُ بِمَا رَحُبَتْ ثُمَّ وَلَّيْتُمْ مُدْبِرِينَ. Indeed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you believers victory on many battlefields. Even at the Battle of Hunain, you eventually got victory, but you took pride in your great numbers and it proved to no advantage for you whatsoever. The earth, despite its vastness, seemed to close in on you. Then you turned your backs, running away from the battlefield. This is the context of this verse. That the one time where they had numbers, they had artillery, they had everything they needed, and they looked to that thinking that would be the source of their success, Allah made them lose at the beginning. Really hold this thought, because we're going to bring everything together in a moment. Just like the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and the companions engaged in battle after battle, we too are engaged in our very own battles every single day. Whether that's building a business, whether that's giving dawah, whether that's making a relationship work, whether that's going to the gym, whether that's maintaining good health, whether that's getting good grades at uni. And just like the Prophet ﷺ and the companions strive to do their best and fought the best that they could to win these battles, we too need to put maximum effort to win our battles. Otherwise, if we just take a step back, we're going to lose. But beware, realize that there is an incredible wisdom behind the Battle of Hunain being a decisive loss right at the beginning. When the companions witnessed many victories on the battlefield, and they gained more power, they gained more numbers, they had weapons, they had armor, they had everything, just because they turned away from Allah in their hearts to the things that they have, thinking that these very things are going to be the source of their victory, Allah made them lose in the beginning to teach them, and by extension us, an incredibly big lesson. As we fight our battles in our lives and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins to give us success, maybe our business starts to flourish, maybe our dawah accounts start to grow, maybe we start to excel at university and get very good grades, maybe our mental health and our self-development is becoming strong. Never ever think that it was your efforts that led you to do that. Never ever think that your business is successful because you worked long hours day and night. Never think that your health is good because you work out in the gym very, very often. Never think that your dawah is effective because you're an incredible speaker. The only reason you see any success in your battles is only purely because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you that success. How many people work twice as hard as you, but they remain poor all their lives? How many people, they eat the best food there is, organic, and they go for runs every single day, but they suffer chronic health issues? How many people dedicate their entire lives to the da'wah, but no one listens to them? Tie your hearts to Allah and not to your efforts. For by Allah, any results you see is because of Him and not your efforts. If you start thinking that it's your efforts and your resources, be prepared for a big shock, just like the Muslims were shocked at the start of the Battle of Hunain. The last reflection that we're going to mention is the wisdom behind why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed the Muslims to be outnumbered in most battles. One of the wisdoms that Allah is teaching us is that no matter how difficult our battles look, no matter how limited our resources are, no matter how much we feel like giving up, we have to face the enemy head on, and we must engage in battle with our hearts filled with Iman and taqwa, just like the Prophet ﷺ and his companions did in every battle. And we're going to see tremendous amounts of blessings in our efforts, inshaAllah ta'ala. You might feel like the whole world is against you. You might feel like there's no way to win your battle, but never give up. Face the enemy with Iman and Taqwa filling your heart, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will do the rest, even though all odds might be against you. Keep looking for that job that doesn't have any haram in it. Keep fighting your desires and staying away from zina whilst you study at university. And know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, كَم مِّن فِئَةٍ قَلِيلَةٍ غَلَبَتْ فِئَةً كَثِيرَةً بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. How many times has a small army overcome and destroyed a large army by the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? If you make sure your heart is tied to Him, watch the wonders unfold in your life as time progresses.